all your stuff. What can figure it out? That's how it chooses you.
Hello, Teresa.
Hello, Claire. It's so nice to see you.
It's nice to see you. What's going on in Teresa Land?
Teresa Land is still about finishing midterms. My last one is tomorrow.
Yay.
Yeah, and then I have my National Clean Needle Technique exam next Saturday. And then once that's done, I'm going to sleep for 1,000 years.
Do you have a couple weeks off, right?
I don't have a couple weeks off, but I have a couple weeks where I don't have anything major that relates to my future profession that has to be done.
Okay.
So it's just like a normal level of activity instead of very heightened one.
Well, hey, we'll take it.
I know, right? It's really like I've never wanted to play video games more than I want to play them right now. I'm very tired, but it's super fun. I'm learning a lot. All my midterms so far have gone well. It's okay. It's okay. It's like a little kid. They fall out of a tree and like break their ankle. But they're like, no, I'm fine. I'm fine.
Yeah.
I can make it home. I'm fine. And then they see their mom and they just start bawling. It's a little bit like that. How are you?
I had a very overwhelming week, and we'll just say a day where everything went horribly awry.
Yeah.
And you talked me off my emotional ledge. But you do that thing where you make me feel very secure because you're like, here's what's happening. Here's what we're going to do about it. Everything's fine. Take a breath. Take care of yourself. You make me feel so safe in those crisis type situations.
I'm so glad that I can do that. That's wonderful. That makes me feel good. Yeah, that was a hilarious day for me because I didn't have to live through it the way you did. I came in just at the tail end when you were presumably sitting on your stoop, staring out into the distance over the plains, wondering what it's all about.
Yeah.
And I got to talk to you at that point.
I have reflected a lot on what's happening to me right now. I think that my tolerance level for stress on the worldwide scale is very high, right? We've all been basically watching the world burn for a year, I feel like.
Yeah.
But my tolerance for my own personal drama is very low as an effect of the pandemic because I work from home, I'm a freelancer, I do my thing, and I don't anymore have to deal with other people on a daily basis. So when stressful things happen now, I'm just instantaneously a mess because I'm not in practice of how to handle my own drama.
That resonates for me for sure. You know, I think we have a limited capacity for drama. And if it's used up on global events, maybe we have a smaller, finite amount of it available for local events, personal events, something like that. Well, and I notice when I'm driving, actually, that I hate everybody. And that was always a thing. I'm not a good commuter. I take the bus if I possibly can just so I don't have to deal with it. And I can just listen to music and look out the window and it's fine. And I have to drive to school. And some days I'm like, you are all assholes. I hate all of you. And I'm literally just raging for no reason in my car. And I drive very slowly and carefully because my car is almost 30 years old. And I'm not in a hurry to get anywhere. I leave enough time. I'm an early arriver. Like I travel like a person from a different generation travels, you know? I'm never like teleporting. I'm always like, no, this is going to take an hour and a half. And if it takes an hour and 15 minutes, that's gravy. Oh my God. Save 15 minutes. And I just get angry at everyone who drives like a normal person from this century. So
right. When did cars get so fast?
You guys are going so fast. They're like, we're going 50 miles an hour. I'm like, it's still too fast.
Grandma Teresa's on the road. Look out, everybody.
Which is not to say, and I got defensive just then, so I'm going to name that. I got defensive. I don't drive slowly. I drive 5 miles over the speed limit as a rule. I just don't drive like a crazy person. I don't switch lanes. I don't try and like make the extra 10 seconds. And a lot of people commute here at relatively large distance, it seems like. And they're weaving in and out of traffic and driving dangerously to literally shave 30 seconds off their commute. I'm like, if you just chilled out and got over in the slow lane, I'll be in the parking lot 10 seconds behind you, and you have stressed yourself and everyone else out on the road on the way there. And I haven't. Me and my 30-year-old car will just be puttering over here. Yeah.
I mean, if the show The Amazing Race has taught us anything, it's that when there's some kind of stop, everybody catches up to each other.
That's right. Stress does not equal success, you guys.
No.
That's a
good
myth.
Point.
That's a myth.
I'm going to write that one down. Everybody, this is the podcast It Chooses You.
Hello.
I'm Claire Patton.
And I'm Teresa Sparks. And we talk about things that interest us, things we like, each other, because each other falls under the categories both of things that interest us and things we like. And if you like us the way we like us, that's hilarious. Definitely keeping that. If you like us the way we like us, please like, comment, subscribe, and rate our podcast. Download it. Do all those things so that we can create a larger community of people who like things like this.
Right on.
Right on. So I think we may have mentioned it before. I have been working on this story that I'm going to tell you for a little bit. And the reason that it has taken me so long is not that it's a complicated story. It's that I really, really love everything I'm talking about. And so I feel a much more heightened responsibility to do it justice than I feel with many of the other stories I tell you. I'm happy to freewheel something that I'm not emotionally invested in, but I am emotionally invested in this. And so it's taken me a while to figure out what the story is and how I want to talk about it. It's taken me a little bit, but here we are. And I am going to tell you about perhaps the greatest day in swing music and Lindy Hop history. January 16th, 1938.
Yay!
Yay! So this is a special episode in that we don't really understand how music rights work. We have differing opinions about it, but it's important for you to hear this music while I'm talking about it because there's this quote from some reviewer who's like, writing about music is like dancing about architecture. And it's kind of that. Like, you actually have to hear the music to really get what we're talking about. The feeling is all tied up with the rhythm and the sound of it. So I have created a Spotify playlist that is available to you all. The podcast, It Chooses You, is the creator, and the playlist is called January 16th, 1938. And so if you want to listen to that while you're listening to this, or play it and then listen to the podcast, or listen to it after in the car, please do all of those things because it's a pretty good selection of the kind of music we're talking about by many of the artists we're talking about.
Yeah, please go check that out.
The other thing I want to do at the top is cite my sources, particularly, of course, Wikipedia for a lot of the basic stuff. The Dallas Swing Dance Society did a pretty good bio of Frankie Manning, who I'll be talking about. John Hancock wrote a book called Benny Goodman, the famous 1938 Carnegie Hall Jazz Concert, which I reference here. And there's a blog by swing dancer Bobby White called Swung Over. So Swung Over is the name of his blog, and he defines swung over as the feeling you get the morning after you've been swing dancing all night, basically.
I love it.
Isn't it great? So I really like these topics. He is a nerd and a geek about them in the best way. Like, really dives in. He's an excellent dancer. He's a professional. I was a cheerful amateur when I danced, and he was one of the people I took classes from, essentially. And he really does deep dives on almost all of the things I'm going to be talking about. So if you're interested in any of this, please go to Swung Over. And also, as many teachers of dance and musical professionals this year have experienced, he basically lost a year of income. So if you like anything we're talking about, go to his blog, check it out, and donate, because he and other swing dancers are offering a lot of good for the world, and we should support them.
Hear, hear.
So to talk about January 16, 1938, I need to tell you about a couple things in advance. We're going to set the scene here. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Frankie Manning, who is one of two swing dancers from the original days in Harlem who lived long enough and continued teaching dance long enough to have taught new generations of swing dancers starting in the 80s and 90s. So he's very important for that reason. He has historical longevity. He and Norma Miller are the two people that we have to thank mostly for the revival of Lindy Hop as a dance. Frankie Manny was born in 1914 in Jacksonville, Florida, but he and his family moved to Harlem in the late 1920s. So he's a teenager in Harlem in the 20s. So he's coming up in sort of the Harlem Renaissance era. By 1930, he had entered his first Lindy Hop contest at the Lafayette Ballroom. And he says he failed horribly. He says he and his partner did so badly that even their friends didn't cheer for them. Which makes me love him. I'm like, yep, that's right. Because that's what a first competition is. It's just, I'm going to mess this up. Let's go. Even after he had that bad experience, he kept dancing, learning new moves, inventing new ways of doing steps. He danced at the Alhambra Ballroom and the Renaissance Ballroom. And he says that those two ballrooms were like middle school and high school, but the Savoy was college. And everyone wanted to get good enough to dance at the Savoy. The Savoy Ballroom is important because, so the Savoy Ballroom is at 596 Lenox Avenue between 140th and 141st Streets in Harlem. It's torn down now, but the ballroom was on the second floor. It was 75 feet wide and a full city block long.
Oh, wow.
Frankie says it could hold 2,000 dancers without anyone getting kicked.
Damn.
It had bandstands at the north and south ends of the ballroom on the east side. So one band would finish a set and the other would start. This is before pre-recorded music, before DJ sound systems. Like, you had live bands to dance to.
Otherwise, there's nothing going on.
That's right. And so dancers at the Savoy could dance to continuous live big band music all night long, every night. The Savoy was in operation from 1926 to 1958. And Barbara Engelbrecht writes in her article, Swinging at the Savoy, that it was, quote, a building, a geographic place, a ballroom, and the soul of a neighborhood, end quote. The Savoy was popular from its opening. It turned away 2,000 people on opening night.
Oh, my goodness.
And it was lit every night of the week.
Yeah, that's called the right thing at the right time in the right place.
Yes. The people who developed this property were like, we think this will work. And opening night, they're like, yes, this is going to work.
I think we're good, y'all. I think we're going to make some bank.
That's right. So it was named after the Savoy Hotel in London, but it's pronounced differently, right? In London, it's the Savoy. And in Harlem, it's the Savoy. And it was, as its manager, Charles Buchanan, says, a luxury ballroom designed to accommodate the many thousands who wish to dance in an atmosphere of tasteful refinement, rather than in small, stuffy halls and foul-smelling, smoke-laden cellars. He's like,
the Savoy, our shit don't stink.
That's right. He's like, all we've ever wanted is for the people to dance. And here's a beautiful place to do it. The interior was painted pink and the walls were mirrored. Colored lights danced on the sprung wood floor. It had a spacious lobby that framed a huge cut glass chandelier. It had a marble staircase.
Wow. So they put some money into this.
They put some money into it. The bouncers wore tuxedos and they made $100 a night in 1926.
If you're going to get bounced from a place, you know you're classy when you get bounced by a bouncer in a tuxedo.
Well, and this is part of the culture, right? When you went out dancing at the Savoy, you dressed up. You looked good. The Savoy made about $250,000 a year from the 1920s to the 1940s, which in today's money is more money than any of us will ever see.
It's got to be like $1 million or something.
Hugely successful. And every year, the ballroom was visited by almost 700,000 people. The dance floor had to be replaced every 3 years.
Damn, they just wore it out.
Uh-huh.
That would be such a great way to measure the success of a ballroom. Like, oh, that's a 3-year floor. It
is the perfect way to measure it. If you're judging the success of a dance venue, how often you have to replace the floor is exactly the way you should judge it. So the best part about the Savoy is that unlike a lot of other ballrooms like the Cotton Club, the Savoy always had a no discrimination policy. The clientele was about 85% black and 15% white, although sometimes there was an even split. Frankie Manning says that patrons were judged on their dancing skills and not the color of their skin. Yeah. He says one night somebody came over and said, hey man, Clark Gable just walked in the house. And someone else said, oh yeah? Can he dance?
Yeah.
Like, that's it. That's all that matters.
I love that.
Lots of dances were developed or became famous at the Savoy, and Frankie credits Shorty George Snowden with inventing the Lindy Hop at the Savoy. Because at the time, most partner dances were danced in closed position with the partners' bodies close together, with an occasional breakaway step where the partners would only be connected by a hand so that they could show off footwork separately. But Shorty sort of developed that breakaway step into a new dance that he called the Lindy Hop. That's the legend anyway. So the Lindy Hop, it's important to say, is primarily what's called a social dance. Dance historians can say more about this. I'm certainly not one. But a social dance is basically you learn to lead and or you learn to follow. And then you dance with a lot of different people in a night. And you have a repertoire of steps that you know, but mostly you learn how to communicate in body language and in rhythm with lots of different people. It's not like a line dance where it's like, we all do this step now and we all do this step now. There's a lot of room for creativity. There's a lot of room for individual styling, and it's a lot of fun. After Shorty sort of invented the Lindy Hop there, the Savoy became known for the constant presence of the best Lindy Hoppers in Harlem. And they were sort of called the Savoy Lindy Hoppers. And like I said before, Frankie Manning and Norma Miller were there, among many others. Pretty soon after the Savoy opened, it became clear that these, quote, wild kids dancing Lindy Hop were at times a legitimate physical danger to the other patrons, who were dancing in a much more relaxed way. Fewer steps, less energy. And so it was agreed that the kids would save their most energetic dancing for an area at the northeast corner of the dance floor on the 141st Street side, which was referred to as the corner.
That's so great. They're like, we just need to put you guys over here. Believe it or not, everyone, Teresa did assign me homework, and I did do that. A little bit of watching. With the Lindy Hop in particular, there's a lot of kicking.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you get into aerials, which I'm sure you'll talk about, which is even crazier. But having watched just a few videos, I am so not surprised that they had to be put in their own corner.
Yeah. So everyone at the Savoy, lots of people were dancing the Lindy Hop, but sort of Lindy Hoppers of the time had maybe about as many moves as intermediate dancers now. Like the repertoire of moves was very limited. It was a social club. The ballroom floor was surrounded on three sides by seating areas and a bar and couches, and people would go and flirt and hang out and watch dancing, and then maybe sometimes dance. And then there were these kids who were like, no, we're here to dance. Mm-hmm. And they're like, okay, dance over there.
It's like the deep end of the pool, right?
That's right. That's a great analogy. So there's a little bit of mythology that Herbert Whitey White, so Whitey's Lindy Hoppers is a group that you'll hear about a little later, and he was involved in the management of the Savoy and ultimately managed Whitey's Lindy Hoppers. There's a little bit of mythology that he actually said, hey, can you guys give this area of the floor to my young dancers, right? He's like creating a team. Can you do that? So I don't know if that's true or not. Who does? But the first time you get mule kicked in the ankle by a clueless lead who doesn't look behind him, you will understand why this is necessary. Hard-soled shoes connecting with your ankle, bad thing. The Savoy was so popular that in 1934, Chick Webb wrote a song called Stompin' at the Savoy, which was named after the ballroom and the dancing that happened there.
That's on our playlist.
It is on our playlist. So you understand sort of the location and the style and the flavor of the Savoy at this time. And in 1935, two things happened that matter to this story. The 1935 Harlem Riot and the 1935 Harvest Moon Ball. And so I'm going to tell you very briefly about those two things. A lot of the information I have about the 1935 Harvest Moon Ball comes from a post on Swung Over, Bobby White's dance blog. So it's generally accepted that the inclusion of Lindy Hop in the Harvest Moon Ball of July 1935 was a response to the Harlem Riot of earlier that year. In March of 1935, a black Puerto Rican teenager named Lino Rivera stole a pocket knife from a 5 and dime, was caught, and the owner of the store threatened to beat him. At which point Rivera bit the owner on the hand, trying to get away. A crowd gathered, the police were called, and when they arrived, they took Rivera into the back room of the store. Probably because a crowd had gathered, the owner of the store ultimately decided not to press charges, and the cops took Lino out through the back door to avoid having to deal with the crowd. But then, as now, Black Americans are much more likely to be physically harmed and sometimes murdered while in police custody. And so when an ambulance arrived to treat the owner's hand, the people who gathered assumed it was there because Rivera had in fact been beaten and so badly he required medical attention.
Right. They were like, well, this tracks.
Yeah, exactly.
That was their everyday reality.
Also at this time, remember, this is the middle of the Great Depression, so a lot of people are out of work. Poverty is really high. It's a poor area to begin with. So there may be more people on the street to witness these events and make logical assumptions, as you pointed out, about what happened than there might be at some other time in history.
Also, why the fuck is there an ambulance coming for someone who has a bite on their hand?
The line that I saw was that it was standard procedure if someone was injured and the police were called, that the police would call emergency services.
Okay.
So local groups called for protests to happen until the police produced Rivera. They wanted to check on his well-being, but the police weren't able to find him because he gave a false address when they arrested him. And good for him. Like, correct.
Of course he did.
Yeah. The police couldn't produce him, and so eventually someone tossed a brick through the window of the Five and Dime where he had been taken into custody, and then the riot started. Ultimately, over about 48 hours, 3 people died, hundreds were wounded, and an estimated $2 million in damages were caused to properties throughout Harlem.
Mm-hmm.
In response, Mayor LaGuardia set up a multiracial mayor's commission on conditions in Harlem to investigate the causes of the riot. And that committee issued a report that identified, quote, injustices of discrimination in employment, the aggressions of police, and racial segregation, end quote, as conditions which led to the outbreak of the riot. And Mayor LaGuardia shelved the report and did not make it public. The only reason we know it exists is that a black New York newspaper, the Amsterdam News, published it in serial form.
Wow.
So, I wonder why this happened. Let's figure it out. And then they get the report back and they don't like the answer, and so they stuff it.
It shows you what happens because, for us white people, it's like, oh my gosh, there's racial injustice. That's a thing, right? Which, is a whole other podcast. It's not that any of this is new, and it's not that people hadn't discovered it, but it's that the powers that be, like Mayor LaGuardia, kept it under wraps, right? So when those in power won't share that information, it doesn't get out in there's a reason why they're tamping that down.
Well, and if we talk about structural racism, this is the kind of thing we're talking about. This is not individual people being racist. This is power structures that are designed and implemented to oppress. Mm-hmm. Legend has it that following the riot, the mayor worked in conjunction with the New York Daily News to put on a dance contest to raise the spirits of the city. And I don't know how much credence we want to give that. I don't personally give it very much. But the Harvest Moon Ball was first announced on July 7th of 1935. When the ball was first announced, there were 4 categories of dance. And it was basically a competition, dance contest, right? Mm-hmm. There were 4 categories: tango, waltz, foxtrot, and rumba. Dances preferred by, you guessed it, white people. So Lindy Hop wasn't a part of the original plan, even though it was and is the vernacular dance of New York. Now, Harlem's Colonial Park had an outside Lindy Hop contest on July 11th, just a few days after the announcement of the ball, and one of the park administrators thought that the park would be perfect for the ball. The administrator of the park contacted the Daily News and said, hey, we have this great venue. We just had a very successful dance contest. You should have Lindy Hop be a part of the ball and you can have it here at the park. I don't know if that's why the organizers of the ball decided to include a Lindy Hop division, but ultimately they did add Lindy Hop to the roster of dances that would compete. Also, great news for Frankie and the other sort of teenage Savoy Lindy Hoppers. The Harvest Moon Ball was strictly an amateur competition. Very few of the first wave of Lindy Hoppers, like Shorty George and his partner Big B among them, would be eligible to enter because most of them were paid to dance at various venues around New York. And so the kids are like, yay, we can do it.
We're really good at this.
Yeah.
And
you guys, we're really good at this, so we're going to go do it. Ultimately, over 2,700 dancers competed across the 5 categories. There were 7 nights of prelims. I know, it's just hard to imagine. We don't have a dance culture like this anymore.
No.
It was huge. The final night of prelims, which was Friday, August 9th, was held at the Savoy. The New York Daily News says, quote, 30 couples, most of them colored, danced the Lindy with a relish, giving themselves up completely to the tunes of Teddy Hill's orchestra, and they showed conclusively that the dance not only originated in Harlem, but is highly perfected there, end quote. Now, this is a weird thing, because most dance competitions, in quotes, were judged by the audience. Like, audience reaction, like the applause-o-meter was how you judge this stuff. But in this competition, they actually hired ballroom dance teachers to judge it.
Across the board or just in the Lindy Hop?
No, across the board. Because those other dances, waltz, tango, foxtrot, those are ballroom dances. Like, Lindy Hop is a vernacular dance, which means it arises in a social setting and no one is teaching you how to do it. You just pick it up by going out and doing it.
And then you experiment with it, you improvise.
At this point, anyway. It's taught now. At the time, these kids were inventing it as they went, and they were going to be judged by people who had perhaps never even danced it before. So that was a little weird. But judges chose 6 of the couples from the Savoy prelims to move on to the finals. Frankie Manning and his partner Maggie McMillan were among them. Meanwhile, at the segregated Roseland Ballroom in Midtown, 10 white couples were chosen to move on to the Lindy Hop finals. And right around this time, a group of black Lindy Hoppers came down to the Roseland to dance to Fletcher Henderson's band, and they were actually denied entry. It was a segregated ballroom. They would hire black entertainers, but black people could not come and be entertained there. And so Bobby White puts it this way. He says, quote, "In matters of appropriation, there are often complex examples that take a lot of exploration and consideration to navigate. This isn't one of them. The Roseland held swing dances and regular Lindy Hop contests, a Black American art form invented up the street, done to a Black American musical form, and yet Black dancers could not enter the place to take part. Furthermore, 10 white couples were automatically going to make it to the finals, whereas there was no amount of Black dancers that were guaranteed to make it. It's a perfect example," he says, "of blatant structural racism." The finals were scheduled for August 15th, which was 6 days after the Savoy prelims, and they were scheduled to happen along an area of the Central Park Mall. The organizers expected 25,000 people to attend to watch. Over 100,000 turned up.
Holy shit.
100,000 people to watch the finals of a dance contest. When that happened, the finals were actually postponed for a couple weeks and moved to Madison Square Garden. They're like, we need to contain this. This is clearly a bigger deal than we thought. So the night of the finals at Madison Square Garden, Fred Astaire and Eleanor Powell were in the audience, among others. And when the Lindy competition was announced, Lindy Hopper Norman Miller said the yell from the crowd could be heard all the way back to Harlem. Everyone was so excited. So Madison Square Garden was set up like it would be for a boxing match. There was a square dance floor set up in the middle, and they sort of did heats on that dance floor throughout the night. The winners, ultimately, of that Lindy Hop competition were Edith and Leon, who were 2 Savoy dancers. They won first. A white couple from the Roseland Ballroom won second, and Frankie and Maggie took third. The biggest win from the night is arguably that the news cameras that were there loved the Lindy Hop competition because it's a very exciting dance to watch.
Oh, yeah.
And so the dance that happened there was captured on newsreels that went out around the world. And it sort of introduced the world to Lindy Hop.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah. Harvest Moon Ball has happened. I mean, Frankie Manning is an amazing person and hugely important in the history of Lindy Hop. There's a great book about his life that he wrote with Cynthia Millman, and it's called Frankie Manning, Ambassador of Lindy Hop. I recommend you check it out. Right after the Harvest Moon Ball, they're sort of dancing at the Savoy, and they're figuring things out, and we've got now basically 2 generations of Lindy Hoppers. The first generation, they still dance relatively upright, meaning they're standing upright. Their center of gravity is smaller. The teenagers dance much lower to the ground, and they dance much more horizontally. They take up more space on the floor. They're lower to the ground in their body, their center of balance. They look a little bent over, and there's a little bit of trash talk, friendly or maybe not so friendly sometimes. They're like, "Oh, you think you're so hot, we're going to challenge you to a dance-off," basically. Shortly after the ball, there was a Lindy Hop competition at the Savoy between Shorty George Snowden and some of his crew of dancers, and Frankie Manning and the other folks who worked with Whitey White.
So it was like old school versus new school.
That's right. It just so happens that this competition is where Frankie Manning did the first air step, which we now call aerials. So Frankie tells the story like this. He had seen Shorty and his partner Big B do a move where she carried Shorty off the dance floor at the end of their performance. He'd hook his leg over her shoulder, she'd hold his leg and just walk him off. They were dancing for laughs a lot of the time, and that always got a big laugh. Frankie wanted to do the same kind of thing, but make it a part of the dance, like land in time with the music and keep dancing. He and his dance partner, Frida, lived next door to each other on the top floors of 2 walk-up apartment buildings. And so when he wanted to practice, he'd shout out the window and ask her to come over. And she'd cross over to his building on the roof and come down the fire escape. and they'd practice, which I just love. So he called over and they started figuring out the mechanics of this. Like, how do bodies fit together? How can we lift each other? How can I move in a way that looks awesome that we can do in time to make this thing happen? So they laid a mattress on the floor, and they're teenagers, right? They laid a mattress on the floor and they're practicing, and his mom comes home and she's like, "What dance move do you have to do with a mattress?"
Valid question.
Yeah, valid question, Mom.
Shut up, Mom. I'm inventing a new dance.
Don't you know how important I'm going to be? The reason they practiced at his house is he didn't want to practice at the Savoy so it would be a surprise at the competition because everyone's constantly stealing from each other. I mean, that's the way of it, you know?
They steal it and then they do it better than you. So
yeah.
Completely the right move here.
So he said he was really nervous the night of the competition because the couples, so Shorty made sure that his crew went first and they were sort of alternating couples that were going to dance and compete. And he said everyone was dancing like the best they'd ever had. He said they were so hot they dug holes in the floor, which that's a metaphor I don't understand, but it sounds amazing. It's coming up on Frankie and Frida's turn, and he's nervous and he's not really into it. You know, he has some feelings. And the band leader of the Savoy's house band leaned down to him and said, "Hey, Frankie, what do you want us to play for you?" And Frankie was really surprised because he hadn't asked any of the other couples what they wanted to dance to. Mm-hmm. And so Frankie says, well, how about down south camp meeting? And the band leader said, about how fast? And Frankie snapped his fingers to give a tempo, and the band started playing. That band leader? Yeah, that was just Chick Webb, the greatest swing drummer of all time. Gene Krupa fans can fight me. Chick Webb will defeat you any night of the week. So now I get to tell you a little bit about Chick Webb. Chick Webb was born in Baltimore in 1905. As an infant, he fell down the stairs, crushed several vertebrae, needed surgery, and never regained full mobility. So the injury progressed to what was called tuberculosis of the spine. It left him with a short stature and a badly deformed spine, which made him look hunchbacked. The idea of playing an instrument was suggested by his doctor to, quote, loosen up his bones, which that's not how medicine works, but cool.
That was a fateful piece of advice either way, though.
That's 1911 medicine right there. He delivered newspapers to save enough money to buy a drum kit. He first played professionally at the age of 11.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. At the age of 17, he moved to New York. And by 1926, he was leading his own band in Harlem. In 1931, his band, I think it was just the Chick Webb Orchestra, became the most popular house band at the Savoy. He wasn't able to read music, so instead he just memorized arrangements played by the band and conducted from a platform in the center, just from his head. A teenaged Ella Fitzgerald became the vocalist for the Chick Webb Orchestra after she won a talent show at the Apollo Theater in 1934.
I always wish I live in a time where people became somebody. And it's like, no big deal. What? I grew up with Ella Fitzgerald. What the fuck? She's a legend.
So this is the guy who's just leaned down and asked Frankie, among all the other dancers, during a competition among the 12 best Lindy Hoppers in the world, what he wants to dance to. Frankie says, okay, now I had danced to Chick Webb almost every night, and we always had a lot of fun with the guys in the band. Like, we'd do a move, and we'd hear them pick it up and play something in the rhythm, or we'd hear a rhythm they played, and we'd dance. But this night, he was like, Frankie, we're going to play this for you. He said it felt like they were deliberately focused entirely on him. Every one of them was really blowing it, like they were telling the audience, this is our man, and we're going to swing for this cat. When he and his partner started stomping this music out, it sort of got me going, he said, and he forgot about the contest. He was really feeling the music. Band was driving. And he and his partner were having a great time. They were like chatting. What are we going to do next? What move are we going to do next? And then at the end, at almost the end of their turn, he says, are you ready to do the step? And she said, yeah, let's go for it. And he says, I remember it like it was yesterday. She just said, yeah, let's go for it. Absolutely. So he swung her out, did a jump turn over her head, and then he jumped. So they were back to back and he flipped her over and she landed right on the beat.
Yeah.
Yeah. The crowd had been clapping in time with the music and yelling, right? Like it's a contest. You're going to get excited. But when Frida landed, for 1 second, it seemed like everyone in the audience caught their breath. Their mouths opened, but no sound came out. It was like people weren't sure they'd really seen what they had just seen. Like they were trying to figure out what he had just done.
I mean, he just broke the sound barrier.
Yeah.
That's the sound of all minds in the room being blown at the same time.
That's right. It's like, that's what happens when you see innovation occur. Like that was it. That was the moment. And then he says the house erupted. Everyone was jumping up and started stomping and clapping and hollering and grabbing each other saying, did you see that? What the heck did he just do? He just threw that girl over his head. The youngsters won that competition. And even Shorty George, who had, sort of gotten his back up a little bit and asked for the competition, came up and he's like, where did you come up with that? And Frankie's like, from you, my man. And he's like, I've never done that. And he's like, no, that thing you do with Big B, he's like, oh yeah, that can be done. And Frankie's like, yeah, I know, because we just did it. We're almost at January 16th, 1938. So around the time Frankie and Frida performed the first air step, Count Basie formed the Count Basie Orchestra, and he led it for almost 50 years. So William Count Basie was born in Red Bank, New Jersey in 1904. He was a really good student, but he got inspired by touring carnivals that came to town, and he really wanted to travel. I just love that idea. The carnies were like, yeah, I want to do that. That sounds great. He finished junior high, but he spent a lot of time at the Palace Theater in Red Bank doing occasional chores in exchange for free admission to performances. And he began improvising music appropriate to the acts in the silent movies that played there. He was a natural at the piano, but he preferred the drums. And unfortunately for him, Sonny Greer, who became Duke Ellington's drummer in 1919, also lived in Red Bank. And so faced with, quote, Greer's obvious superiority, end quote, Basie switched to piano exclusively at the age of 15. It's like the lesser-known Gianni da Vinci.
Right.
who also wanted to be an inventor and artist. But goddamn, Leonardo lives here too.
You got to find the opening in the market.
That's right. So around 1920, Basie moved to Harlem, where he lived down the block from the Alhambra Theater. But ultimately, he toured to the Midwest and then lived in Kansas City and Chicago for several years, developing his sound before returning to New York in 1937. We know Chick Webb. We know Count Basie. And we have a little bit of context for the cultural scene of swing music, big bands, and Lindy Hop. On the night of January 16th, 1938, Benny Goodman and his orchestra played Carnegie Hall, the first swing group to play that venue. And Chick Webb, the undisputed king of the Savoy Ballroom, engaged in a battle of the bands with Count Basie and his orchestra out of Kansas City. Webb featured Ella Fitzgerald as his vocalist. Basie featured Billie Holiday.
Jeez.
They traded sets for an unspecified amount of time, but I think the Savoy was generally open from like 9 p.m. to 3 a.m., so let's just say they played 4 hours, and we'll probably be right. This is a night at the Savoy. The Savoy Ballroom holds 4,000 dancers if people aren't going insane. Not only are these people dancing to these bands, it's a social club, and so the couch and seating areas and the bar area are all completely full as well. I think it could hold 10,000 people. And so just imagine a packed, low-ceilinged, beautiful room. Everyone's dressed up. 2 of the best bands in the country are fighting it out, and people are dancing in this environment. So it was a publicity stunt, and so magazines were there. Metronome magazine said that Basie won. New York Daily News said Webb won. Dancer reaction to the bands, there was some drama and a power play by Whitey that I'm not going to get into because it's boring, but it made it look like the dancers preferred to dance to Basie. But the metric, again, was essentially the applause-o-meter. So, the results are going to be open to interpretation.
Right.
Webb was declared the winner according to the ballot boxes at the door, but the outcome is still debated today. And while this is happening in Harlem, Benny Goodman is down at Carnegie Hall playing the first swing concert there. Benny Goodman was born in 1909 in Chicago. He was the 9th of 12 children, born to poor Jewish immigrants from the Russian Empire. He said money was always a problem, as you might expect with 12 kids in a family. On Sundays, his father would take the kids to free concerts, and he enrolled 10-year-old Benny and 2 of his brothers in music lessons starting in 1919. So they had no money, but he got music lessons because his parents wanted him to have that. Playing music was a great escape for him, he says. It was a great escape from the poverty. He made his professional debut in 1921. Do you want to do the math? He was 11 years old. At 13, he got his first union card. Yeah, it just blows my mind. It's like these people are 11 and they are phenomenal. I mean, this is like a conjunction of planets kind of thing. By the mid-1930s, Goodman led one of the most popular groups in the United States. His concert at Carnegie Hall is described by music critic Bruce Eder as, quote, the single most important jazz or popular music concert in history. It was jazz's coming out party to the world of, quote, respectable music. Before that concert, he and his band had been touring and recording for 4 years straight. I can't even... You tour a show for 10 days and you come home and you sleep for a week, right? I know I did. I was I'm so tired. 4 years. They've been touring and recording. Tickets to this concert at Carnegie Hall sold out weeks in advance. Capacity of 2,700. Seats all sold with a top price of about $50 in today's money. The first half of the concert, he did an abbreviated history of jazz, starting with ragtime, and then transitioned to popular hits, jams like Honeysuckle Rose, which is also on the playlist, and some trio and quartet numbers. The audience sort of gradually warmed up throughout the night, and by the time Martha Tilton sang Loch Lomond, it provoked 5 curtain calls and cries for an encore, which forced Goodman to make his only audience announcement of the night, saying that they had no encore prepared, but Martha would come back soon for another number. He's like, oh, you guys are into this. Cool. Okay.
I love that he educated his audience.
Yeah.
That is a smart move because at that point, if it's not completely known, you have to throw in the history there. You have to show the evolution and bring your audience along with you into this world. Yeah.
And I realize as I'm telling you this story that I'm telling it as though the Battle of the Bands happened first and Benny was playing later, and that's absolutely not what was happening. Benny Goodman played earlier because it was a respectable concert venue. And then afterwards, basically all of his musicians went up to Harlem to hang out while Chick Webb and Basie were battling.
Oh, those musicians must have had a hell of a night. Can you imagine? We just played Carnegie Hall and now I'm here watching these incredible musicians and dancers rip it up.
More than that, Count Basie actually sat in in Benny Goodman's orchestra during the first half of his performance. He played piano and then headed up to Harlem for the Battle of the Bands. I only have 2 legendary things to do tonight, you guys. This is the first.
Obviously, Benny Goodman, I think, understood how important this concert was. But do you think these guys in general had any idea what a fucking rager of a night they were about to have? Like, how important it was while it was happening?
Yeah, I don't know. And I actually don't know if Benny Goodman knew either, quite honestly. I know that a lot of the history written about it frames it as though he did, and as though he's somehow the king of this moment, and he's the one who moved swing forward. And I just don't know if that's true. I mean, I know more about his concert than I do about the Battle of the Bands, because he's white, frankly. There's more written about him. Like, he's chosen for media prominence, partially because of his skin color. I mean, he's also a badass clarinet player. I mean, there's no doubt he can swing. Please, I'm not ragging on Benny Goodman. He's Benny Goodman. He's Benny Goodman, but Count Basie's Count Basie, and Chick Webb is Chick Webb. Lionel Hampton's Lionel Hampton, you know? But Goodman is sort of who we know about. And also, not coincidentally, Benny Goodman lived a very long time. And so Chick Webb, as you'll find out later, did not. And I think, longevity matters when you're talking about history, because you get to rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it until you're the star. Not saying that's what he did, but, The concert at Carnegie Hall was recorded by 3 different recording companies, but then the masters were lost for a decade. So imagine Woodstock, but then all the recordings are gone, and they don't come out until 78.
Whoops.
Oops. Sorry, guys. I think ultimately Benny Goodman's wife Alice found them in a closet in their house, and he's like, oh yeah! So they were released as a double album in 1950. Goodman's bands started the careers of so many jazz musicians. So just listen to this lineup. All of these people played with him at Carnegie Hall, okay? Harry James, Jess Stacy, Teddy Wilson, Lionel Hampton, Gene Krupa, Buck Clayton, Johnny Hodges, Lester Young, and Count Basie, as I said, came down and played some numbers before he went uptown. Most of these people ended up leading orchestras of their own. And here it was it's just camp. Also very important is, like I said, racial segregation was real. This is, I think, the first integrated jazz group to play to an integrated audience in history.
That's huge.
I'm not trying to take away from Benny Goodman's contribution to musical history. I'm just saying perhaps it is expanded because of his skin color more than it should be. Like I said, I originally thought this story was about this one night because Benny Goodman and Chick Webb and Count Basie, they played to huge crowds and, it's this huge moment and the squares know about swing. But I realized as I was looking into it that I had some discomfort with that narrative that comes out of the fact that, like I said, a man with skin privilege is coming across in all these historical records as a savior figure and the leader of a swing movement, when that music was happening all around him and before him, and most of the musicians and audiences were black. I have some questions. But, like I said, it's a lesson in how the media selects people for prominence. Racism, as we've said before on this podcast, is a white disease. And the fact that sometimes white people do something about it shouldn't be the only story we tell about ourselves, I think. Lionel Hampton, who's amazing in his own right, is talking about Benny Goodman. And he says, quote, "As far as I'm concerned, what he did in those days, and they were hard days in 1937, what he did made it possible for Negroes to have their chance in baseball and in other fields." So he did help the cause of racial segregation. And there are sort of anecdotal stories about him threatening to beat people up who speak poorly of the black members of his band. In the early 1930s, black and white musicians weren't allowed to play together in most clubs. And in the southern states, racial segregation was enforced by Jim Crow laws. Also important to note, we think of Jackie Robinson. You guys can listen to the baseball episode if you feel like it. That'd be swell. We think of Jackie Robinson as this major color line barrier breaker. But that was fully 10 years after this concert. Like in everything, the artists do it first, and the jocks figure it out a little later. So I mentioned before that Chick Webb didn't live as long as Benny Goodman or Count Basie. In November of 1938, 9 months after this Battle of the Bands, his health began to decline very seriously. But for as long as he could, he continued to play out because he didn't want to give up touring so that his band could remain employed during the Great Depression. He completely disregarded the advice of his doctors and his own fatigue, which often had him passing out from physical exhaustion after gigs so that his band could stay employed. He ultimately had surgery at Johns Hopkins in 1939, but the surgery was unsuccessful, and he died on June 16th, 1939. Reportedly, his last words were, "I'm sorry, I've got to go." His death hit the jazz and swing community really hard. After he died, Ella Fitzgerald led the Chick Webb Band until she left to focus on her solo career in 1942, which caused the band to break up. Art Blakey, Duke Ellington, Gene Krupa, Buddy Rich, they all credit Webb with influencing their music. So he lived a very short life, but was an astounding musician and artist, and influenced everyone who has played jazz and swing music since then. Basie didn't die until 1984. He's remembered by many people who worked for him as being very considerate of musicians and their opinions, modest, relaxed, fun-loving. He said, "I think the band can really swing when it swings easy, when it can just play along like you're cutting butter." He introduced several generations of listeners to the big band sound and went through a lot of evolutions in his own play style throughout the years and left a really extensive and influential catalog of music. Benny Goodman died in 1986 from a heart attack while he was taking a nap at his apartment. He had played a gig just 6 days before that. He is remembered as kind of a dickhead. Helen Forrest, who was a vocalist who toured with him for 20 months, said it felt like 20 years. Felt like a life sentence.
God.
But he, too, kept learning and growing until the end. At one point, not very far after his concert, he realized that he had learned to play the clarinet with a very strange embouchure that was limiting his ability to sort of grow and develop. So he had his calluses shaved off, and he completely learned to play the clarinet again in a different way so that his growth and development wouldn't be limited by his physical relationship to the instrument, which I think is amazing.
That's really brave.
It really is. You're at the top of your game and you're like, you know what? I don't think I'm doing this as well as I could. I'm going to go ahead and just learn how to do it again slightly differently. Like, that's amazing.
I mean, if I were that well established, I'd be like, no, y'all are doing it wrong.
Do you know who I am?
Do you even know who I am?
I'm going to close by talking about, just real briefly, Frankie Manning and sort of the second wave of Frankie Manning's dance career. He's a teenager. He won these competitions. He's in a dance troupe formed by kind of a sleazy manager guy, Whitey White, but he was successful as a manager. He is the one who booked them a gig in Hell's A-Poppin', which is a video that a lot of people have seen. That's sort of the video you know if you think of Lindy Hop. He also got them a scene in the Marx Brothers movie Day at the Races. So he was a successful agent, even though he was kind of agreed at this point exploiting them because they were young. But because of his management, these kids, they were just kids. They toured Europe. They got to meet kings and queens and other heads of state. And these are all poor kids from Harlem who got to do that. So there are pluses and minuses to this. He was in the armed services during World War II, and then he was discharged after the war. And he realized that big band music was sort of going away. And he tried to have a dance group for a while, but they didn't really do very well. And he realized that he was not going to be able to do this as his living. And so he got a job as a postal worker. And he did that for 30, 40 years. Some dancers, meanwhile, in California in the 80s, were looking at these old dance clips and newsreels, and they had access, I think in LA, I think they had access to like film and television archives in some way. And they were trying to figure out how to dance this dance because, as I said, it's a vernacular dance. And so it's not like they could go to a ballroom school and say, hey, can you teach me Lindy Hop? Because the little Arthur Murray feet didn't exist. You couldn't just follow the feet and learn how to do it. And people weren't dancing it anymore. And so they're watching these old newsreels trying to figure things out. And Erin Stevens was one of the partners who was trying to do that. She ended up calling every Frank or Franklin or Frankie Manning in the New York phone book, trying to find him. And she called him, and she said she always asked the same question, is this Frankie Manning the Lindy Hopper? And he said, no, this is Frankie Manning the postal worker, but I used to be Frankie Manning the Lindy Hopper. And she and her partner flew out to New York and said, please teach us. And so for 3 or 4 days, he taught them Lindy Hop in his house. And that was the start of people in our generation being able to learn this dance. I just think it's amazing because I don't have that. If I watch old dancing, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. But it would never occur to me to like chase it down and figure out whose feet those are. And is the person who owns those feet still alive? Can I figure out where he lives? Can I find him? It's just a wonderful act of devotion, passion for the dance. She and her partner, they say they lured him out of retirement. And so he began teaching classes again. He taught Erin and her partner. He also taught, this is hysterical. This is the thing I love most about Lindy Hop, which is that he taught people from California, but then he also was brought to Sweden and taught the founding members of Sweden's like most elite Lindy Hop group, the Rhythm Hotshots. Because these newsreels went out around the world, and because these kids toured with Whitey and went around the world knows Lindy Hop. Lindy Hop belongs to the world now. And when he came out of retirement and he started teaching in all of these places, if you go to the larger dance events, there are people from so many different countries and continents. There's a huge Lindy Hop scene in Australia. There's a huge Lindy Hop scene in Japan, Korea. It's amazing. And it's thanks to Frankie, because he came out and he started teaching again. He won a Tony for some choreography he did in a production of Black and Blue. He was a consultant on Malcolm X, and I think he also acted in that film. In his later life, the Lindy Hop community around the world sort of showed their appreciation for his work by throwing him birthday parties. For his 80th birthday in 1994, it was commemorated by a week-long celebration in New York City. His 85th birthday party culminated in a sold-out party at the Roseland Ballroom, where he was not allowed to dance. A pair of his dance shoes at the Roseland were actually placed in a showcase alongside other dancers like Fred Astaire at the Roseland, which is no less than he deserves. In 2009, a 3-day celebration was planned in honor of his 95th birthday, and this is the one I attended. But it turned into a memorial service because he died of pneumonia on April 27, 2009. He was 94 years old. Every Lindy Hopper around the world owes him a huge debt of gratitude for his warm and friendly teaching style, for his insistence that the dance should be fun and you should experience joy when you do it. It's not about competition and cutthroat and all of that. And if he hadn't come out of retirement to teach, we would have lost this dance. Thank you, Frankie Manning. We owe you a huge debt of gratitude, and we love you. That's the story of Frankie Manning, or part of the story of Frankie Manning, and the story of an amazing night in swing dance history, January 16th, 1938.
Lovely. I love that you told that story from the dance and from the music perspective, because you could have easily just focused on the music.
Yeah. I discovered when I was trying to talk about the music that I was bored. Because I'm not a musician. I mean, I play trombone, but I don't play trombone. I don't have the language to describe what's happening, and other people do. You should check out Swung Over. He has many articles about that. But I know how to talk about the dance because I know what it feels like to do it. And I know how amazing it is when you're dancing well and when you're dancing with someone you like dancing with and when the music is good. It's the best thing that has ever happened.
Well, and it seems like in talking about that evening, you couldn't separate the two.
Yeah.
Each one was a part of that night.
Well, and Frankie definitely talks about that, right? I mean, he was talking about how the Savoy had live bands every night. And so the dancers would go, and if there was enough space, they would dance right in front of the bandstand. The musicians could see the dancers, and they were feeding off of each other. And it was 2 ways of celebrating the music. And that happens now, which is actually really exciting. And I want to throw in here a mention of Jonathan Stout, who is an amazing swing musician in California. He and his Campus 5, and he and a larger group that may just be called the Jonathan Stout Swing Band. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. They play at dance competitions and dance events. I mean, a live band is the most wonderful thing ever. And when a live band is really, when they're killing it, I've seen entire ballrooms of dancers stop dancing just to listen to the band because it's so amazing. So it's quite an experience.
That's wonderful. I was on the edge of my seat. I love that it's almost like you're tracing the history of energy, right? It's this amazing energy that came out of this place in this time.
Yeah.
And then, suddenly the rest of the world catches on, and this is how, and the rest of the world should catch on because this thing is amazing. And then it kind of goes away, and then it comes back in this other form, and Frankie's like out there again teaching dance. Oh, it's just so cool.
This has been It Chooses You. We will be back in a few days.
Thank you all so much for listening. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Testing. Great. Thank you for listening to It Chooses You. Your hosts are Teresa Sparks and Claire Patton. Our theme song is by Bobby Dart. If you'd like to get in touch with us, drop us an email at itchoosesyoupodcast@gmail.com.